Greetings. Well, I'm joined for this episode by Brendan Badley, actor and scrappy storyteller. Under his belt, he has over 100 TV shows, video games, and interactive experiences. He has performed opposite some of the biggest names in the world. Currently an LA resident on the front lines at Paramount, as a strike captain in the SAG-AFTRA union strike. He's helped me understand the issues at hand, making daily videos about common labour issue demands that the writers are fighting for producers to recognise. I'm always asked when I start a contract by my family, are you working with anyone famous? Or they'll ask me during a contract, is there anyone I'd know? Brendan's shorts include the following line: you probably don't recognise me, and that's the point. I'm not a celebrity, I'm not a millionaire, I'm a jobber. That's such a well-crafted phrase. He has performed live in VR in 3 continents, supported and presented 50 extended reality, that's XR, storytelling prototypes, and established the Innovation Lab in NYU's Tisch School of the Arts. Throughout PBH, I've been screening, streaming, and screaming just a little bit, presenting, hosting producers meetups, a book launch, an artist showcase, and 80 plus live story and spoken word performances. I'm navigating physical, digital, and virtual. Tri-presence is something that I am aspiring to embed into all of my work. Brendan has performed live VR, pushing the boundaries of physical, digital, and virtual in ways that I can only dream. So I would like to introduce you to Brendan Bradley.
Wow, hello.
Hello, hello.
With an introduction like that, I feel like I should just leave now. It's only downhill from here. Like, you made me sound amazing. Thank you.
Not at all. It is an absolute delight to be able to follow a story that is going to become part of a producer's story that we're all trying to uncover with extended reality, virtual reality. So entering this industry, just tell me and tell everybody your story.
My background? I mean, you tapped into some of it. I'm Brendan Bradley, and I consider myself a scrappy storyteller. I've done over 100 TV shows, movies, video games, commercials, and then extended reality beyond projects. I founded the Innovation Lab at NYU's Tisch School of the Arts, and all that comes from the fact that I started as a nerdy theater actor in community theater in North Carolina, and kind of immediately wanted to kind of escape and aspire to be a very pretentious theater actor. No, none of that selling out for film and television, of course. And I went to NYU, did 4 years of training there through the Strasberg studio. I then went to RADA for, they have a broad program that Americans can come for basically 6 months and get some training there. And I got certified in Shakespeare work, classical work, had a lovely time and ran out of money. And then did the regional theater circuit all over the United States, doing Shakespeare work, classical work, musicals, straight plays. And then I was co-founder of 2 theater companies, avant-garde theater companies, new works companies and festivals in New York City as part of, around 2006, what became known as the independent theater movement, where basically we were in some ways rebelling against the fact that both the equity scaffolding of what it was to do a 99-cent theater contract to then be able to transfer or upgrade that show was too restrictive for small theater companies. And that space within Manhattan became at such a premium that the only way theater companies could survive was doing co-productions where multiple theaters were sharing rehearsal space, performance space, and kind of doing cabaret style work or repertory theater of multiple shows. And I moved to Los Angeles in the heat of the writer's strike, the last writer's strike and Broadway stagehand strike, specifically falling in love with this idea of what at the time was called new media or digital streaming video. And that all came about the fact that I was making trailers and process videos for our onstage work, embedding them onto our websites that I was coding, and realizing that we had more views per evening on those videos than we could have ever had in a 99-seat house. And this conversation of having a more direct access to an audience, virtual access to an audience, a global access to audience, as well as an interesting immediate feedback loop with audience where not in real time, but through comments, through email, through online forums, we were suddenly able to engage in that dialogue that was simulating what you receive in the venue, but certainly not replacing it. In some ways, just enhancing, scaffolding on top of what we already experience in the room, but now persisting beyond the room. And I've then basically adopted every new technology format that I can get my hands on. And specifically during COVID, I was in the middle of, I had done a adaptation of Mackers. I won't say the play and jinx us all, but an adaptation for film where I shot the actors simultaneously with a depth sensor camera and with a cinema camera. And I was then able to take their tracking, kind of trackerless or markerless tracking data into Unity, render that out as 3D animation, and choose when we were in world of the story versus in the real life of the story, because it was about a video game company, and the witches in our version were in-game characters that were predicting the future of the company and turning the characters against each other as part of this startup video game company. And in the middle of this pipeline for 3D animation and tracking actors in real time and puppeting them in virtual space, I immediately became hyper aware of the fact that we were all as theater actors trapped at home. And so I released a online venue called The Future Stages using Mozilla Hubs as this web hosted free open source platform for anybody to be able to stand up their work without any 3D modeling or coding background. And from that, the immediate question, as you've heard, is there's always, who are you working with? But also, yeah, but like, how does it work? And so we started presenting new works in a new works festival called Onboard XR inside of web virtual reality, so that without any access to equipment, without any access to any downloading of software, and without a coding background, any artist could stand up their first VR experience in a short form cabaret style hackathon and event. And then that's led to me doing a lot of other virtual reality work and developing some of those projects in a more dynamic way.
It is. I've been exploring how to get on that first rung and how you work with, how you get your hands on the technology to even explore what it might do. And just the videos that you put up explaining all of those steps that you've done, the VR theatre that you've made available. I mean, I'm still wanting to gain access to that, and although I can gain access, my interest is how do I bring artists with me as well? Because as a background in stage management, I need the performers and the artists and the companies to be there, so I actually have a job to do.
Right.
Which is fascinating, of explaining this world. And I've encountered a lot of high-end tech is expensive, and virtual production was one of the things that I'm interested in, which kind of then took me down the rabbit hole of volumetric video and seeing some of the things that you had been doing with green screen during COVID, and different ways of presenting things through the camera, but still retaining live essence. As an independent has been something that I found very inspirational, to be able to know that there is work out there that is of the caliber that you are producing as an independent artist. And in our notes, I had mentioned I often bump into people who will tell me what they're about to try and innovate. And those things that they're trying to innovate are really actually quite pixelated and actually quite naive in their scope. And now being able to say, well, have you seen the work of Brendan Bradley and XR and Ferryman Collective? And all of a sudden, it puts them into it's a very humbling position to be able to put artists who think they're doing everything first into a position where they have to consider, actually, you're doing it for the reason you want to explore, but not because you're doing it first. And find out who's doing it first, and then support them and champion them and find out what's going on. And I think that's kind of the road that I've been going on, to champion your good self.
Well, that's very kind. But I think just to echo your philosophy there, I think there is this very interesting culture in technology product right, of releasing a new device or a new software application or even a new plugin, there is this first mover culture and conversation and talking point. But that actually isn't relevant or constructive to an artistic practice, because artistry, fundamentally in storytelling, we are talking about a modality that has been around for thousands of years. And the point is that it's, oh God, is it Sondheim that says, let it come from you, then it will be new, right? That's Sunny in the Park with George.
Mm-hmm.
The whole point is that it's personal, individuated artistry and expression. It's
Mm-hmm.
not meant to be first. No one wins theater. No one wins dance, right? The point is that it's personal
So
expression and that it's communal. And so in many ways, I think that it's lovely that we always have this intersection of art and technology, right? At one point in time, text was technology that was new and was innovative. But trying to capture a first mover advantage in art really is not indicative or relevant to being an artist or to the culture of art and to the what I think is the future proofing of art. In some ways, the people that are scaling and scaffolding this work are never saying that they're first. They're just explaining their relevance in the space. And it's where I've been so excited to watch the this particular corner of the internet, the kind of VR liveness movement, at least that is concentrated in North America. They are actually mirroring their own specific milestones of American theater history and movements. And they're just owning that piece of intentionality. So I think of Ferryman Collective as being representative of the storefront or site-specific movement in Chicago in the 1960s, right? They are, in effect, going into non-traditional spaces, VR chat, taking an environment that exists and then bringing narrative to that and then walking audience through that space with the lens of that narrative. That's its own, that
Yeah.
we don't have to fight about who invented doing, theater, like Tony and Tina's wedding, right? An immersive theater. They're just bringing the incredible legacy and culture of that art form to this new technology. And I think that any technologist or artist collaboration, if you're looking to be first in the technology, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. You're too late. The internet is already here. Mediated performance is already here. Embodied performance through technical systems. Puppetry's been around a long time. So your interest can't be in being first. It has to be something else. And it's the what else that I think makes it interesting. We don't go to see Hamlet to see the definitive Hamlet. We go to see that production of Hamlet by that creative team, by those artists and those technicians. And honestly, the best Hamlet I've ever seen was done as a comedy in a bar. And it wasn't until I'm crying with laughter and we get to act 5 and I go, oh my God, everyone's about to die. This is Hamlet. And I don't want these people to die. I've been having a great time. And so again, I think it's all comes down to, Priya Parker would say, you can't have a gathering without intentionality. And I think it comes down to that intentionality for how we design and build these systems.
So how have you found audiences through all of this? I think that's, who are your audience? How are you communicating this change with an audience, or are you finding an audience already there?
I think that any platform that any social space or any online space that you enter has a native audience, right? There is an existing audience. Wherever you're streaming this out to right now has a specific native audience that has its own culture, its own practical rules and guidelines and self-moderation, probably its own inside jokes, and tools for expressing with each other and communicating with the artist in real time. So there is going to be a native audience to every platform. And it does become a conversation of, are you there for that audience? Are you building something for the audience? Or are you building something with the tools? I will say, when we were doing Ferryman Collective's production of Gumball Dreams, the world is built by Screaming Color, a phenomenal 3D artist and musician who created Gumball Lounge, which is a pre-existing VR chat world that has been really viewed and celebrated by a lot of the community. But the VR chat community is not necessarily natively one to walk through a serious, introspective, vulnerable play. That's not actually the intentionality of that space or that audience currently. And so we had to put a lock on the world, that you had to punch in a code that changed every day. to be able to enter the space to rehearse, because we didn't want people to come in and start trolling very hurtfully and hatefully. And so that's us using the tools, but not necessarily building work that is for that community. When we look at the work of, for example, Meta Movie and Jason Moore, they build within Neos, and they've really built an experience that celebrates and showcases not just what is so great about the toolkit of Neos and the technology of Neos, but they've really built something that is for that community. It's very like me as a visitor to that space, logging in through Steam VR and being an iBot, or watching the live streams out of a heroed performance from an influencer. That's incredible, and I recommend everybody go see that show in some form that they can. But the people who really keep coming back to that show and the audience for that show is the Neos community, because it is a real celebration of that platform and that online space. And then I would say that my work specifically, I like to say, is really intended for a theater community that probably is not VR native and not interested in the VR technology. Their hearts and minds have not been won over yet by the technology.
Yeah, I
And
think
by
that's what I find
using-
interesting about the notion of a triple presence, and especially with non-player character, which we'll come to talk to towards the end. But having a physical audience that are attending a physical event that then has invited people to participate with you in a physical world that takes them into virtual, and having a stream that someone can watch on the outside is just. It is it's the arts theatre, and it is that storytelling and that community that trying to bring into this extended world. That's their extended reality, this kind of movement. Yeah.
Well, and to echo your conversation about triple presence, is I think that we have to really embrace what we mean by extended reality. It means you are extending something.
Yeah.
It isn't the base level. It is something that is enhancing or elevating what you've already built. And if you don't build a thoughtful, intentional, and sacred space at the kind of ground level, it doesn't really matter how far you extend it. It's going to fall apart on you. And so in many ways, the work that I'm doing, first and foremost, focuses on what is the traditional theater of it all, as far as the mechanics of being inside of a space. And something I actually get into dialogue frequently with my technical director, Michael Moran, about is Michael can do compelling, remarkable things that are far beyond what we're integrating into our shows. Because I believe he is the youngest and most talented virtual arts producer in web VR in the world. And his live programmatic ability to do things literally in real time to save the show is unparalleled.
And you're working in
anytime-
Mozilla hubs to do that, yeah?
Well, we're working in Mozilla has a cloud-based version of itself that allows you to then open source it and change the code. We've customized that code pretty aggressively at this point to do theatrical queuing, but then we've also worked on other platforms. So we've brought the work to other spaces as well. We're actually working on a migration right now to go entirely to a different platform for a different show to explore a different theatrical mechanic. But specifically, when working in the space and when rehearsing and workshopping the work, we do get to places that you could do something with the technology that is very impressive, but I would have to give up all control over being able to save the show if something goes wrong. And to me, that steps a little beyond the intent of live theater, because live theater is still, at the end of the day, a tethered connection between me and the audience to make sure that I can always keep us on the rails as the live performer. And so anytime that we're moving or breaking that, I feel like that's where we lose the liveness, which is my tether or connection, my dialogue with the audience. And so that's always a negotiation between how much control I have to give up, because then if something breaks, we're all just sitting there waiting for the server to refresh rather than continuing to still have a theatrical experience together.
Yeah, that live performance. Now, as we move on, I was a bit torn at this point when I was looking at my notes, because I got this opportunity to talk to you. Did I want to talk to you about your journey of technology, because that's something I love to have with practitioners of, first experience of VR or mobiles, and I think it's a really good foundation. But I'm actually going to hold that conversation for hopefully another time. But what I wanted to just touch upon was the technologies right now that we're using for live performance. There's a battle going on in AI, in contractual law, in how we as creatives and live performers are used by the film industry. And performance professionals across every sector want to do a job and be paid properly for it. And you're a strike captain. So the current dispute with producers has sympathetic strikers from all unions on the picket line. So when did you join the strike, and why do you think that this dispute might be different from the others that are taking place?
The others that are taking place nationally and globally, or
I think
the others in the
think
past?
I think right now, I mean, in the UK, there's rail strikes for the way that people are being positioned within their workplace, which is essentially a sideline to what what you're fighting for. Theatre hasn't come out in the UK. There's a lot of support for SAG-AFTRA across Equity's website, but with Equity being a union that covers all the sectors, film, TV, audio, it's all there, and we're seeing some, very excitingly, a lot of the theatre contracts that are being negotiated, we're seeing 20% increases. We're seeing increases to recognising that artists in the cost of living need to have their accommodation paid for as part of their contract, and not something that they have to go and run after during their time on tour. Touring allowances are going up. They're putting up per diems for food. So there's a strange imbalance in the UK to some extent as a theatre practitioner, seeing the theatre contracts actually doing what they're supposed to do, to then go, how can we then come out on strike for the theatre and TV sector, because we're actually getting a little bit of what we want already.
Sure. I mean, I think what that gives us, but that provides some scaffolding that if one labor movement is finding success in its messaging, perhaps that's messaging that we can all borrow from. I look at, for example, the Teamsters just had a massive successful battle at threatening to go on strike for the UPS workers. And getting a better contract based off of the fear of this is a hot labor summer and there's a lot of these movements across the country, and we don't want that to be the drivers as well, on top of what's already happening with hotel workers and the entertainment industry and many other institutions. I think that my involvement specifically is I've always been active as a member. I've been on committees in the past and things like that. I've done a lot of volunteerism, but specifically in this movement, when the Writers Guild went on strike, which was May 2nd, I believe, I was on the line May 3rd, showing my solidarity with the Writers Guild. And a lot of that comes down to it's a collaborative medium, right? We've always, in all of the arts, we are working collaboratively with each other. And so labor supports labor, showing up for the writers, showing up for my crew when their contract comes due next year. It's all about us being supportive of each other so that we can all work constructively together. We are truly, we can't do it without any one of us. But through my being on the front lines with the Writers Guild of America for their strike leading up to our contract negotiations for SAG-AFTRA, the Writers Guild captains nominated actors that they'd been seeing on the line frequently to be captains, because SAG-AFTRA did not have a captain system, because we have historically been against any sort of action. We haven't really been on strike for 40 years. And
that's fundamental. And for people, no one goes out on strike because they on a whim.
No.
It's really hard for, even though you still have the union system a lot stronger in the US than we have in the UK, which has been pretty much dismantled over the last 40 years. But no one strikes because they feel like it.
No, it's not enjoyable. And what I like to really say is that, we're on the front lines, not just as kind of a protest and standing in our power, but it's also, we're demonstrating we're not on vacation, right? This isn't like some whimsical thing we're doing for funsies. It's hot out there. There's no shade. We're out there for hours at a time. We're on the street corner. It's not great, but we are right outside the gates, ready to work. We want to work. That is the goal. And I think that what gets lost in some of the messaging is that this isn't necessarily a debate against the contract that has been presented. We are currently dealing with a legal body called the AMPTP that represents most of the major studios and networks in these collective bargaining agreements. They will not sit down with the SAG-AFTRA committee. We're not having conversations right now. They have not returned response or communication since July 14th at this point. So we're dealing with a negotiation that is supposed to happen every 3 years, and the other side of those negotiations won't even participate in the negotiation. So a big part of our movement is just demonstrating that we're literally standing right here. We're ready to have the dialogue. We're ready to have the conversation and participate in what is a necessary experience. I think to answer your question about the technology side of this all and the why now and what's kind of new about all this, I think that across all of labor, at least in the States, we are looking at the large conglomeration and vertical integration of companies that have slowly gotten away from the core product, the kind of core margins of what it is to just run a business. And it is no longer about the actual manufacturing and cost and daily operations and labor of making a product and bringing it to a consumer. It has become instead about the valuation of the idea of a company. And that is all based off of serving kind of a stock price or a portfolio or some sort of executive compensation package. And in many ways has been siphoning off the profits from these multiple industries that should be going into improving worker rights, improving conditions, improving quality of product before it gets treated just as pure profit that gets siphoned off and paid out to investors or to executives or to higher level decision makers. And so a lot of what I think we're seeing in this moment is that through technology or through the prism of technology, we kind of misrepresented digital streaming as a whole in entertainment. This was a model that was not thoughtfully monetized. It was never meant to be the primary mode of distribution, or at least that's not how the business was set up. This was secondary windowing. This was ancillary. The idea was you had a movie that was performing in theaters and then, oh, it would also be here, or a TV show that was on basic cable, but oh, it was also available here.
Yeah.
When it became the primary mode of distribution, there is no one who can actually look you in the eye and tell you that for $15 a month, you are going to get unlimited premium content. That on its head speaks for itself. That's not a sustainable business model. And so we're living out the last 15 years of misrepresenting a bad faith business model that has resulted in there not being the revenue capture and the compensation that is required to sustain an industry, so to make more product. But then we're also starting to use these same talking points and this same myth into new technologies like artificial intelligence that is ignoring the underlying value and contributions of the data set that it's generating from, which then again starts to create an unsustainable practice that is going to lead us here in another 10 to 15 years. So you can't tell me that this model over here didn't work for the last 15 years, but that we're going to rinse and repeat the business modality for the next 15 years. And then what, call another oopsie?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's all changing. I mean, the one thing I think people outside of the entertainment industry, even as a theatre practitioner, I don't quite understand the notion of residuals and syndication. But that was a huge, that's a huge part of what's being fought for and restructured right now, is how you work for a on set and you record, it goes into the can, as it was called.
Yes.
And then it becomes edited. There's bits that don't work right. So you would be brought in on the studio and you would re-record some lines and you would get paid for recording those lines.
Correct.
And then it would be available. And then the BBC would decide to show it. So that syndication would then make some money for all the actors that were involved, would get their money. The British Equity Collector Society is an organisation that's set up to be able to distribute those funds. You know, your agent isn't going to be able to do it forever. So those blocks of money are then distributed by an agency. And with AI on the rise, especially just taking the audio and re-speeching things, even I can see how money is going to be lost. And you don't often earn the highest wage. And especially coming back to your line, you might not recognize me, and that's the point. I'm not a celebrity. I'm not a millionaire. I'm a jobber. And we do these jobs. And if you're really good at your job, you're a great actor. And acting isn't as simple as people say it is. So the sort of the syndication part of it and sort of technology, what do you think is going to happen? I mentioned Amy Webb, who once a year does her technology, and she uses a great three strikes. Optimistically, what's going to happen? Catastrophically, what might happen if everything just goes according to the big producers, and then realistically, what do you think we might end up with?
Sure. So quick to just put into context the residual model overall. So the last time the writers and actors went on strike was in the 1960s. It's why we have the residual model. And the idea was that, yes, you used to get paid just a day rate to create content, and then the content was out there in the world. That was when there was a single deliverable coming out of a single day's work, right? I perform, it's like being on stage. I perform, that is the show. You sell tickets against that show. With entertainment product, especially with multiple windows of distribution and exhibition, there's variety of monetary capture. There's a lot of new revenue potential. And we don't know what the revenue potential of any product is going to be. It's highly speculative. We don't know what's going to be a hit and what's going to be a flop. So the favor, and this is a favor to producers, and I've been a producer of low budget content, and I've received this favor and this benefit, is that I make something for a very low day rate, often minimum wage. I'm just going to honor the baseline obligations of employing anybody for any job. And then speculatively, I get to air that one time in one meaningful way. And the idea is that I'll recapture some or most of my revenue if done correctly and if it's a success. Now, if there's additional revenue capture of any kind, because those people all worked on a very low rate, and I got the benefit of speculatively making more content, I then have to allow them to participate in the success of that content. So the alternative, as we get into catastrophic and blue skies and all this, the alternative at its core value is, if you would like to pay me for every movie what Harrison Ford made in Star Wars, I'm okay with that. That sounds like the most recent Star Wars, where I think he made 70 million. If you want to hypothetically have to pay me 70 million every time I show up, because it is possible this movie could go on to perform very, very well and be the next Star Wars. So you've got to pay right out the gate every actor the lifetime potential of that content. I don't think anyone would disagree with that from the acting side of it, but we understand that's unreasonable. We understand that that's unsustainable. So somewhere in here, we have to acknowledge that this is already the negotiation, that if you're going to be able to take a product that is constantly earning new revenue, everyone, every laborer has to participate in that revenue. And they do. For example, all of the crew also receives residuals. It just, they treat residuals differently. The writers and the actors receive personal residuals for their personal work. IATSE captures all residuals for all labor, and it's how they fund their health and pension plans, which are more stable than the actors and the writers' health and pension plans. The acting one had to kick 25% of its members that were under it off of the health plan in 2020. So that's the give and take here of these different models. But when we come to what we're looking at from the current negotiations, which again are ongoing, the writers have just sat back down with the AMPTP because they finally came back to the table after 100 days of striking. They've been leaking deal points to the press, but that is against their own media blackout request. So it's hard to really take those at face value, because we don't really know why they're breaking a media blackout, except for bad faith purposes. The actors don't actually have a contract before them that has been negotiated by both sides, that both parties have said, yes, this is tangible deal points we're happy with. So all of this is hypothetical. All of this is us just having a thought experiment. And I ask everybody on the line every day what their opinions is about it. But I think that the blue sky, if I could snap my fingers and we have whatever we want, is that we just enter into a core natural conversation about the fact that this is historically a favor to both the producers and the consumers to have a high volume of speculative content enter the marketplace and only pay for it when it performs well. And if we reinvest in that decision so that there is a sustainable and healthy revenue model, residual model for all media. And I think that there exists in our contract language historically a really good target for this. Our commercial agreements, when you do a commercial, which I did a bunch for Staples, we have 3 milestones on that agreement. There's a core day rate, like we discussed, that you just get paid to show up and do the work. There's then a holding fee every quarter. So they every quarter are opting into holding the rights to that content. And if they decide not to pay for it anymore, they then lose that content. They're basically saying this is no longer profitable and we're no longer going to have the rights to air it and we're no longer going to pay you for it. And that's then everybody making that agreement together that we're no longer going to use this piece of content. We're going to have to re-edit it, or we're going to have to reshoot it if we want to redo it, or we're going to have to enter a new deal. And then there's a fee triggered every time they actually use or exhibit the commercial and the product as a residual. And I think that when it comes to big streaming or when it comes to AI, this is a rather lovely notion of I get paid to do the onset work at a low tier, just to fulfill basic employment obligations and working conditions. Then every quarter, when you're putting out those shareholder reports and talking about how great everything's going, you can decide to pay based off of keeping us inside of your library of content. And then every time it actually gets exhibited or generated or used, yeah, you don't pay for it until it's actually used. So maybe I shoot something, I get paid a basic wage. You decide to hold it in your content library. I get paid a little fee for that. And then, hey, nobody actually ends up using it. No one ends up watching it. It's a dud. Well, the next quarter, you can say, you know what? This didn't perform the way we wanted to. We're going to let this contract expire and go with God. So that's my blue skies in what I think could be achieved. Catastrophic, what I think it could happen is a lot of these partners just decide to kind of cross their arms and pout and say, no, we don't want to actually have to pay anything for this content. And I think what it begins us on the road towards is, and we see this in the comments all the time of like, well, I'll do it for a box of ho-hos. Stop paying those stupid actors. Well, literally, you see this in the comments. I didn't just make that up. But I see us on a trajectory where we are just happen to be at the front lines of our likeness and our work product and our creativity being ingested into a platform that makes the platform trillions of dollars. And what that is effectively is active usership of any platform. We're talking about anybody with a social media account. So if we don't bake in protections at an industry level for what the value of that work is and what the transaction of that work is and what the rights and protections of that privacy data are, then it opens up that every single user on the internet doesn't actually own their own work, which erodes all of intellectual property law, which is actually the entire foundation for which Hollywood and Silicon Valley are based, is the valuable exchange of IP. And so we are talking about the death of copyright. We're talking about the death of patent law. We're talking about the complete dissolution of any IP, which then makes up about 3 to 4% of the global economy, which then leads to some sort of economic collapse because there's no exchange of intellectual property and there's no ownership. I don't think that that's an argument that Disney wants to make, but I guess we'll see, because that seems like it would actually hurt every industry and every active user of the internet. Somewhere in the middle, though, of what I think realistically could happen is I referenced that I think that we've moved towards a space where there are companies that have gotten away from the core underlying product or commerce or even capitalism of what it is to be inside of an industry, of bringing a product to market via labor and then interacting with a consumer and trying to find and live within the margins. I think that the AMPTP as a legal body may just fundamentally represent too many different types of companies. Paramount, for example, that I am a strike captain on every single morning outside the gates, organizing volunteers, working as part of this movement. Paramount doesn't sell electronics or server space or vacation packages or pajamas. They sell movies, and they need to make and sell and position movies in the entertainment ecosystem and marketplace. That is their core business. I don't know that their needs are going to be similar enough to an Amazon or an Apple or even a Netflix long term. And it may just be that, like the original studio system that had their own separate deals, at first with independent actors and then with the union itself, we may be entering a new phase of the entertainment industry where there needs to be a Paramount contract. And maybe the Paramount contract is better than the Sony contract. And so it gets really competitive of who wants to go work for a Paramount movie versus a Sony movie. But I think that what I see being the only current road out of this is that there just are so many different needs of these different institutions. And some of these institutions need to get back to work. They need to get back to making entertainment product, because the entertainment, the movies and the TV shows are not a loss leader for a platform or for a technology or for a toolkit. They are the product. And the laborers like making that product and want to work inside of it. And so I think there might be faster, more efficient conversations that speak to the needs of not just the institutions, not just the laborers, but Hollywood. Like, the Los Angeles economy is built on the fact that we have a film industry here. And so that's actually good for the neighborhoods and streets and schools of Los Angeles, is that there's a thriving entertainment community. And so again, I think that when we look at kind of like best case scenario, worst case scenario, and then what realistically at the current stonewall of where we are seems to be the fastest path to just common sense getting everybody back to work, that's the only one I can currently see, unless these partners start changing their minds.
And it is going to play out on the world stage. I mean, the fact that it's making the general media in the UK, let alone the media that I follow because I'm connected with the industry. But I mean, you've covered so much in that 10 minutes. It was absolutely fascinating and just explained just how large the topic really is. But the final reason why we are here, for the last 3 weeks, it's been the Edinburgh Fringe. The Edinburgh Fringe takes place every year. It took place digitally during COVID. And I think, like me, you really saw the world turn to digital in a way that we never imagined. It was a terrible time, and nobody wants a world pandemic. But the adoption of a platform like Zoom, which I know for me before pandemic, I could never have got anybody to use Zoom because there was another app to download. It was trying to find how can you get people, but now people will, Zoom is kind of there. And the first 2020 for the Edinburgh Fringe, very much digital. 2021, digital, but 22 and here in 23, there was probably 10%, probably even only 5% of the work was digital. And I think there's still a big market for that. And working with PBH Free Fringe and wanting to support artists that, if you can't be there, be here, has always been, I haven't been able to go up to the Fringe. And this year just seemed the right time to take everything that I'd been doing in VR, in XR, in AR, the information that I'd been gathering in the background, which is still that weird world of crypto NFT, which is kind of floated off in a way that no one's really talking about it anymore at the moment. But PBH opened the doors and allowed me to do this crazy virtual venue, which they didn't really understand what it was. And we have had, say, 80 plus live performers who couldn't, or performances that couldn't be at Edinburgh. And I think there's a big thing about not being able to go to Edinburgh. It's very, very expensive. But there is a need to go. And what I wanted to do is try and bring some great energy to something that might be able to capture the imagination and step foot into Edinburgh next year. And you've been a huge part of that. And all the way up to our conversations, probably just under about 6 to 8 months now, we've been talking about, how we're going to do something together. How am I going to bring NPC to the UK again? Because I know you've brought it here once before. But we have this interview which I'm delighted that you've been able to share who the essence of you and where your journey's been. But tomorrow we have got NPC being screened into the space with you, and I don't know if this is the first time you've done this, doing a director's commentary. So you will have the God mic, and you will, I hope, share, a bit of a react. Brendan reacts. You may not say anything, you may say something, you may burst into song. But for those that don't know what NPC is, a non-playing character, tell us about this endeavor and tell me about non-playing character.
Sure. So Non-Player Character is a interactive virtual reality musical. It's an original musical inside of virtual reality that came out of the pandemic and specifically looking for hybricity. It was originally a commission from the Museum of Science in Boston for their adult programming. They basically asked, how could you use live performance inside of an IMAX dome theater? And they wanted a 15-minute short little taste of something. And I do not think they thought I would write a musical about a sad robot, but that is where I went with it. And the real goal is to explore these different modalities of audience interaction, but all rooted within the traditions of musical theater storytelling. So I am a live actor who plays a variety of characters, but primarily a non-playable character of a fictional video game who witnesses the hero character die and was not programmed to process grief. And so I turned to the audience to navigate me through grief, to basically continue the story without the hero character. And what I wanted to really explore was through all of my other virtual reality work, there has emerged this actor guide that basically when we're inside of a VR platform, especially non-co-present physically, so you log on in the UK, I log on in Los Angeles, I kind of have to be the authority over the space and tell you where to go and guide you through the experience, help troubleshoot your technology along the way. And that has emerged as a very lovely relation to the audience. But I wanted to invert it because I think that it denies the audience the true embodiment and agency of the space. It also doesn't empower the audience to challenge their relationship with the technology, because they're kind of being told when to hit the buttons, how to hit the buttons. And so what I wanted to do was bring 4 audience members on stage with me as participants, fully improvising and giving them an open world experience that they could, I'm going to trust them entirely. I'm a character without his own agency. And if they tell me we're going to go over there, we're all going to go over there together. If they make fun of me, I'm going to let them make fun of me, and I'm going to be very sad about that. And that's going to be a part of the show. We had one show where a woman got trapped behind the set. She somehow teleported behind the 3D environment. And we turned the entire show into a rescue mission to go find her and save her. But it allows the audience to truly control the story and co-create with me live on stage, then in front of a seated audience that is participating with it the way they would any traditional theater, especially interactive theater, where they're watching the 3D world, basically like a live cinematic or a live video game come to life, or live animated film, projected in a large format screen. They have a mobile device on their phone, or a web app on their phone that allows their mobile device to help them vote on key decisions, spawn objects inside the world, read more about the show and the team. And so they become kind of participating throughout. We also send colored lights to their phone at certain points of the show that respond to the colors that are happening inside the virtual world. So it becomes a little bit of a dance party, a little bit of a rave. And the idea is really exploring these different relationships between the audience, but most importantly, the relationship between the onstage participants and the seated audience, and letting them feel their relationship and intentionality together to co-create narrative in real time. It is a musical because with all of that tightrope walk, I need some way to be able to seize back control of the show and subtly nudge us back on the path when things derail or one person's kind of monopolizing the conversation. And so the songs allow us these natural breaks to be able to transition us cleanly to the next phase of the story, get us back on track, and allow me to kind of regain some control of the show through spectacle and song and, the magic of theater.
The magic of theatre. And it is a technology show that really does need good Wi-Fi. All the bits need to talk to each other. You need to be able to talk to either your crew on the ground or your crew remotely. And in an ideal world, everybody's in the same physical location. And it's that hurdle of technology being able to function correctly that is the greatest hurdle at the Edinburgh Fringe right now. And this whole experiment has really culminated in being able to talk to venues in Edinburgh to say, if you would like NPC to come to Edinburgh in 2024, we really do need a venue that has cable to the building, fibre, with a broadband data managed connection. And that is my dream for next year, and it's one thing that I am looking for. And being able to have this tri-presence taken to Edinburgh, so that if you can't be there, you can be here in the virtual. But if you can't be here in the virtual, but you are in Edinburgh, you might be able to step in and out of those different worlds. I have had such an amazing 50 minutes having a good chat to you about where you've come from, where you might be going to. So just as we close, what's happening next for you, Brendan?
What's happening next for me is all over the place. I mean, right now my industry is shut down. I've had the good fortune for the last almost 8 years of working full time as an entertainer in and around Hollywood, which has then afforded me to be able to do things like the Innovation Lab at NYU, or take on speculative projects like NPC, where we're working nights and weekends to kind of futz with breaking everything in real time, and that being okay, and that being part of the process and exploration. We also, you just kind of mentioned, there's a lot of concerns for people at the venue level regarding this relationship between these new technologies and traditional venues, and in some ways letting them not perceive it as a threat to their underlying business, but an enhancement and extended reality to the in-theater experience. And then also inviting new audiences into this sort of alternative programming. That conversation is still evolving. We haven't found all of those strategic partners and messaging yet. But I know for a fact that in the next 3 to 5 years, and what I like to say is somebody is going to EGOT with the same piece of content, because you're going to be able to do a live show that has musical components that go to a soundtrack, that has an animated film that goes out to motion picture and video on demand, that has persistent environments that allow meetups and touring and interactions with fans, that allow merchandising with all of the assets and the models. It really does invite a full 360 franchise-ship of every single storytelling property from an independent, intimate, immersive experience. It empowers any creator to fully franchise 360 their storytelling IP and creation and their audience. And I think in a world of direct to consumer and endless content on demand on endless platforms, that real-time liveness is the magic. It is the secret ingredient, because appointment-driven storytelling, having a place to go, an intentionality to be there, and a community to participate with, will always win the day as far as the why and where and how of showing up and being a part of an experience.
It's exciting times, and what a great place to leave it. So we're going to close the stream down. We'll end this for the live audience, but what we're going to do is transition into the virtual space and go and have a wander around. So in the future, when we do have people waiting for us, or we can have people who are there after the show to be able to come and have a chat and do after events that you're not just in Zoom. So doing this transition is just going to be as exciting as the conversation itself, but this has been a really great time. So I'm going to do the bringing this to the end. So thank you so much, Brendan, and I will see you on the other side.
Thank you.